The morning Marcus Chen found chunks of concrete jutting from his creek like broken teeth. He knew his 5-year battle with the Willowbrook Estates HOA was about to explode into something far worse than petty fines over his mailbox color. He'd been walking his property line at dawn, coffee in hand, savoring the peace before another day at his architecture firm when he spotted the first piece. Gray industrial concrete, still bearing the ribbed impression of wooden forms, sat half-submerged where crystal-clear water once flowed. 20 feet downstream, another chunk. Then another. By the time he walked the quarter-mile stretch of creek running through his 10-acre property, he counted 47 pieces of broken concrete, some as large as kitchen tables. Marcus set down his coffee mug on a boulder and pulled out his phone, methodically photographing each piece. The creek, which had babbled peacefully through his property for the 30 years since his parents bought the land, now struggled around the obstacles. Water pooled in strange places, no longer following its natural path. "What the hell?" he muttered, zooming in on fresh tire tracks leading from the HOA's private road down to his creek bank. The tracks were deep, the kind heavy equipment would make. Following them with his eyes, he could see where vegetation had been crushed and small trees snapped. 3 hours later, Marcus stood in the marble-floored office of HOA President Diane Holsworth, his mud-caked boots leaving prints on her Persian rug. He didn't care. "Someone dumped construction debris in my creek," he said, sliding his phone across her mahogany desk. "These tire tracks lead directly from your new pool house construction site." Diane, a woman who wore pearls to Saturday morning board meetings, barely glanced at the photos. "I'm sure you're mistaken, Mr. Chen. Our contractors are fully licensed and follow all disposal protocols. Then you won't mind if I have an environmental inspector come take a look?" Her perfectly manicured fingers tightened on her coffee cup. "That seems rather extreme. Perhaps what you're seeing is natural erosion. Creeks do change course over time." Marcus retrieved his phone. "Natural erosion doesn't leave tire tracks, Diane. As I said, our contractors are gone." Marcus interrupted. "I already checked. Santos Construction finished your pool house 2 days ago and left town, right after someone decided my creek was a convenient dumping ground." Diane stood, her smile as sharp as her stilettos. "Mr. Chen, I'd be very careful about making accusations you can't prove. The HOA has significant legal resources and defamation is a serious matter." Marcus headed for the door, pausing at the threshold. "So is illegal dumping, and environmental damage, and about a dozen other violations I can think of." Within a week, Marcus noticed the first changes. The creek's melodic babble had grown sluggish, almost gurgling. Water that once ran clear now carried a gray tinge. Where the concrete chunks created dams, algae began to bloom in the stagnant pools. His neighbor, Jim Patterson, called him one evening. "Hey, Marcus, you notice anything weird about the drainage lately? My backyard's getting swampy, and I've never had water issues before." Standing on his deck, Marcus watched his creek struggle against its concrete obstacles, water spreading into places it had never gone before. The HOA had no idea what they'd set in motion, but they would. Soon. Dr. Sarah Winters pulled off her waders and shook her head, water droplets flying from her gray-streaked hair. The environmental consultant had spent 3 hours in Marcus Chen's creek, and her expression told him everything he needed to know before she spoke a word. "It's worse than just illegal dumping," she said, spreading photos across the hood of her truck. "This concrete contains rebar, chemical sealants, and what looks like pool-grade chlorine residue. Someone didn't just dump construction waste, they dumped contaminated construction waste." Marcus studied the images of rust-stained concrete and oily water sheens. "Can you prove it came from the HOA's pool house project?" Sarah held up a chunk of broken concrete with blue paint specks. "This particular shade of pool paint? It's a specialty brand called Azure Dreams. I've only seen 3 contractors in the state use it." She smiled grimly. "Santos Construction is one of them." That evening, Marcus sat in his home office, surrounded by documents he'd obtained through public records requests. The HOA's own meeting minutes told a damning story. 3 months ago, they'd voted to reduce construction costs by eliminating unnecessary expenses. The contractor's original bid had included a $15,000 line item for proper debris disposal. In the final contract, that line had vanished. His phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor Jim. "Mosquitoes are insane over here. My kids can't even play outside." Then another from Carol Nguyen, 2 houses down. "What's that smell?" "It's like rotting eggs mixed with swamp gas." Marcus added their complaints to his growing file. The altered water flow was creating perfect breeding grounds for mosquitoes, and the stagnant pools were turning septic in the summer heat. 3 days later, Diane Holsworth arrived at his door with 2 men in expensive suits. "Mr. Chen," she said, her smile predatory, "these are the HOA's attorneys. We understand you've been making inquiries that could damage our community's reputation." The taller attorney stepped forward. We're prepared to offer you a generous settlement to cover any inconvenience you've experienced, provided you sign a non-disclosure agreement and cease all environmental investigations. Marcus crossed his arms. How generous? $50,000. To poison my creek and pretend it didn't happen? No deal. The shorter attorney's eyes narrowed. Mr. Chen, you should know that HOA bylaws give us significant power over property owners who create disturbances. Your architectural practice operates from a home office, doesn't it? That could be construed as a commercial violation. Get off my property, Marcus said quietly. As they turned to leave, Diane paused. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Mr. Chen. We've broken bigger men than you. That night, Marcus installed security cameras around his property. Good thing, too, at 3 a.m. they captured clear footage of someone in dark clothing photographing his house and attempting to access his trash bins. The figure's build looked suspiciously like the HOA's maintenance supervisor. By week's end, the situation had escalated. The county health department had received anonymous complaints about Marcus supposedly running an illegal business from his home. The building inspector showed up citing concerns about unpermitted structures that had stood for 20 years. Even his trash pickup mysteriously stopped. But the HOA's harassment campaign had backfired in one crucial way. It had pissed off Dr. Sarah Winters. Nobody threatens my clients, she told Marcus over the phone. I'm expediting the water quality report and sending copies to the State Environmental Protection Agency. Oh, and Marcus, I found something interesting in the concrete samples. Pool construction requires specific chemical markers in the concrete mix. Guess whose chemical signature I found? The HOA had just made a very expensive mistake. The first crack appeared in Janet Morrison's basement wall on a Tuesday morning, a hairline fracture that wept moisture like a wound. By Thursday, it had grown 3 inches and her sump pump was running constantly. Her house sat just 200 yards from where the creek now pooled into an impromptu swamp. It's never done this before, Janet told the foundation inspector, her voice shaking as water seeped through the growing crack. We've lived here 12 years without a single issue. The inspector ran his hand along the wall, frowning. Your water table has shifted dramatically. Something's changed the natural drainage patterns around here. 2 streets over, Robert and Linda Patel discovered their pool deck had developed a suspicious tilt. What started as a barely noticeable slope had progressed to the point where patio furniture slid toward the deep end. Their pool contractor delivered the bad news. The soil beneath was saturated and shifting. Marcus documented everything from his property's elevated position, watching the disaster unfold like a slow-motion avalanche. The creek water had backed up so severely that it had found new paths, seeping underground and following the subdivision's utility lines. The HOA's own drainage system, designed for normal water flow, was overwhelmed. Then came the wildlife. There's a goddamn alligator in my backyard. Tom Richardson's panicked call to 911 made the local news. The 3-foot gator had wandered up from the river system, attracted by the new swamp-like conditions. Animal control removed it, but the damage to Willowbrook Estate's reputation as a luxury community was done. The mosquitoes had become unbearable. The county health department issued warnings about West Nile virus after testing revealed infected populations. Residents who paid premium prices for Creekview lots now kept their windows sealed against the stench of stagnant water and decay. At the emergency HOA meeting, the community center overflowed with angry homeowners. Diane Holsworth struggled to maintain control as residents shouted over each other. My foundation repair estimate is $80,000. Janet Morrison waved the contractor's quote like a battle flag. Our home value has dropped 20% in 1 month, Robert Patel added. The realtor said it's unsellable with the swamp conditions. Diane raised her hands for silence. The board is investigating this situation. Investigating. Marcus stood from his seat in the back. I have the investigation right here. Environmental reports showing concrete contaminated with pool chemicals dumped in my creek. HOA meeting minutes showing you eliminated proper disposal costs. Photos of the illegal dumping. Should I continue? The room erupted. Several board members visibly paled as homeowners turned their fury toward the HOA leadership. You knew about this? Stoutman shouted. They tried to bribe him to keep quiet. Jim Patterson had overheard enough of Marcus's story to fan the flames. 50 grand to shut up while our houses sink. Diane's co-president, Harold Fitzgerald, attempted damage control. Any actions taken were in the community's financial best interest. Whose best interest? Carol Nguyen stood, her usual calm demeanor cracking. My daughter has been hospitalized twice for severe allergic reactions to mosquito bites. The medical bills alone are crushing us. As the meeting devolved into chaos, Marcus noticed several residents on their phones. Within hours, local news crews would arrive. The environmental report Dr. Winters had submitted to the state was already making waves in regulatory circles. That night, as Marcus walked his property line, he could hear the unnatural gurgle of his altered creek. In the distance, floodlights blazed as three separate households dealt with emergency foundation repairs. The sweet smell of decay drifted on the evening breeze. The HOA had saved $15,000 on disposal costs. The damage was already approaching $2 million. The sound of breaking glass at 2:47 a.m. jolted the entire Richardson family awake. Tom Richardson rushed downstairs to find his living room tilting at a nauseating angle, family photos sliding off the mantel. His flat-screen TV crashed through the entertainment center. The house was literally tearing itself apart. "Get the kids! Get out now!" he screamed to his wife as a support beam groaned overhead. They fled with nothing but pajamas and car keys, watching from the street as their $750,000 home sagged like a wounded animal. By dawn, the scope of the catastrophe was undeniable. The Richardson house had sunk 18 inches on its eastern side. Next door, the Kovic family discovered their front door wouldn't close. The frame had twisted as the foundation shifted. 3 houses down, a natural gas leak forced an entire block to evacuate when the ground movement ruptured underground pipes. Channel 6 News led with aerial footage that made Marcus's stomach turn. Where Willowbrook Estates once showcased manicured lawns and pristine homes, a disaster zone had emerged. 3 luxury houses showed severe structural failure, their foundations crumbling as the supersaturated soil beneath them turned to unstable muck. The engineering firm of Jacobson and Associates delivered their preliminary report to a packed community center. Lead engineer Dr. Michael Jacobson pulled no punches. The illegal concrete dumping created an underground dam, he explained, pointing to cross-section diagrams. Water that should flow naturally through established channels has been forced into the subdivision's substrata. Your homes were built on soil that's remained stable for decades. Now it's essentially quicksand. Can it be fixed? Harold Fitzgerald asked, his usual arrogance replaced by desperation. Theoretically, yes. Realistically, Dr. Jacobson shook his head. You're looking at underpinning every effective structure, installing massive drainage systems, and completely re-engineering the water table. Conservative estimate, $30 million. And that's if we started today. The room exploded into chaos. Diane Holsworth fled through a side door as residents screamed threats of lawsuits. 2 board members resigned on the spot, literally throwing their resignation letters at the remaining leadership. Marcus watched from the back, feeling no satisfaction as his neighbors' lives crumbled. His elevated property remained stable, but he was surrounded by devastation. Property values hadn't just dropped, they cratered. Several families had already abandoned their homes, unable to afford repairs while still paying mortgages on uninhabitable houses. The class action lawsuit came together with stunning speed. Wagner and Associates, the law firm representing 43 homeowners, didn't mince words in their filing: gross negligence, criminal environmental violations, and wanton destruction of property values. We have evidence the HOA board knew about the illegal dumping within days of it occurring, lead attorney Patricia Wagner told the assembled homeowners. They chose cover-up over remediation. That choice has destroyed millions in property value and endangered lives. The state's involvement escalated everything. Environmental protection agents in hazmat suits took water samples while criminal investigators interviewed board members. Santos Construction's owner, tracked down in Mexico, agreed to testify in exchange for immunity, confirming the HOA had explicitly instructed him to dump the concrete to save money. Meanwhile, the stinking continued. The Patel family watched in horror as their pool cracked in half, 20,000 gallons of water flooding their already compromised foundation. The Morrisons' house was condemned when the inspector found the main support beam had shifted 6 inches off its mount. Local real estate agent Brenda Walsh summed up the situation brutally. Willowbrook Estates is toxic, literally and figuratively. You couldn't give these houses away. Who's going to buy in a neighborhood where the ground might swallow your investment? As Marcus surveyed the wreckage of his once peaceful community, he realized the HOA's cost-saving measure had triggered an avalanche that would bury them all, financially if not literally. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Patricia Thornton read the verdict. The court finds the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association guilty of criminal environmental violations, gross negligence, and conspiracy to conceal illegal activities. The state hereby imposes fines totaling $4.7 million. Diane Holsworth, once the pearl-wearing queen of the HOA, sat in rumpled clothes, her assets frozen and her reputation destroyed. 2 board members had already pled guilty to lesser charges in exchange for testimony. Harold Fitzgerald faced separate criminal charges for attempting to bribe a state inspector during the investigation. But the criminal verdict was just the beginning. The civil lawsuit judgment came down like a sledgehammer. $47 million in damages to affected homeowners, plus Marcus Chen's separate settlement of $3 million for the destruction of his creek and attempted intimidation. The HOA doesn't have $50 million, someone whispered. Attorney Patricia Wagner stood to address the crowd. No, they don't, which means special assessments for every property in Willowbrook Estates. Our calculations show each household will owe approximately $287,000, due within 90 days. The room erupted in anguish. Even residents whose homes hadn't sunk faced financial ruin. Within weeks, for sale signs sprouted like mushrooms after rain, but there were no buyers. Who would purchase a home with a massive assessment and environmental disaster in progress? The demolitions began in month 3. The Richardson house, the Powell residence, the Morrison home, all condemned and razed. The twisted foundations were too damaged to salvage. Excavators and dump trucks became permanent fixtures as crews worked to remove not just the houses, but hundreds of tons of contaminated soil. Marcus watched from his property as environmental restoration teams finally began the real work. The concrete chunks were painstakingly removed from his creek, each piece cataloged as evidence. Hydrologists worked to restore the natural water flow, installing temporary channels while the stream bed healed. It'll take 5 years minimum for the ecosystem to recover, Dr. Sarah Winters told him, watching as workers planted native vegetation along the restored banks. The good news is that nature is resilient. Your creek will flow clean again. 6 months after the verdict, Willowbrook Estates ceased to exist as a functional community. Of the original 150 homes, only 30 remained occupied. The others stood empty, their owners having declared bankruptcy or simply walked away. The HOA itself dissolved after filing for bankruptcy protection, its debts far exceeding any possible recovery. The state took control of the environmental cleanup, funded by a combination of fines, asset seizures, and emergency allocations. The price tag eventually exceeded $60 million, 4,000 times what the HOA had saved by skipping proper disposal. Marcus's victory felt hollow as he walked his restored creek. The water flowed clear again, bubbling over rocks where concrete once choked its path. But the view had changed forever. Where once he'd looked out at a thriving neighborhood, abandoned houses now dotted the landscape like broken teeth, an ironic echo of how this all began. Tom Richardson sent him a message from their rental apartment. No hard feelings, Marcus. You did what you had to do. We all should have listened sooner. The final insult came when the county assessor revalued the properties. Marcus's land, once worth $2 million, dropped to $400,000. He'd won his battle but lost his investment. Still, unlike his neighbors, he had a habitable home and a flowing creek. On a quiet evening, as spring peepers sang along the restored waterway, Marcus raised a glass to the empty houses across the water. The HOA had learned the hardest lesson of all. Cutting corners on environmental protection doesn't save money. It destroys communities. The creek flowed on, indifferent to human folly, slowly washing away the evidence of greed and negligence that had poisoned its waters and the lives around it.